Carter, look at me when I speak to you." The words cut through the heavy air of the boardroom like a blade, sharp and deliberate, designed not to request attention but to demand submission. Every pair of eyes in the room shifted toward the 19-year-old sitting at the far end of the long mahogany table. The setting could not have been more hostile. The boardroom was dressed in wealth. Polished wood, leather chairs, and tall windows that spilled unforgiving afternoon light across the table. It was the kind of room built to intimidate, to remind anyone who entered that power did not sit with them, but above them. Aaliyah Carter sat small in her chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap, but there was nothing timid about the way she held herself. Her shoulders were square, her spine straight, her chin lifted just enough to signal defiance. She did not flinch when Edward Langston, the chairman of the university board, leaned forward. His suit was perfectly tailored, his silver hair slicked back with precision, his expression carved into something between arrogance and disdain. "You are accused of falsifying research records, lying to faculty, and violating the school's honor code," he said slowly, savoring every syllable as though he were delivering a sermon. "These are grave charges, young lady. Do you deny them?" The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead light and the soft shuffle of papers in the hands of the professors seated along the wall. Even the students who had slipped into the back, hoping to witness the spectacle of a black girl's fall, leaned forward in breathless silence. Finally, Aaliyah raised her head. Her dark eyes locked on Langston's face with a steadiness that unsettled him. Her voice, when it came, was calm but carried the weight of something larger, heavier, something that had been festering for years. "I deny nothing," she said. Then, with a pause sharp enough to slice the silence in two, she added, "Except your lies." The reaction was instant. Gasps rippled through the back rows. A professor choked on his coffee. Someone muttered a curse under their breath. Langston's smug smile faltered, just for a flicker, before he forced it back into place. "Careful, Miss Carter," he said, his tone now laced with quiet threat. "This board has the authority to end your academic career today." Aaliyah's laugh was soft, bitter, almost hollow. "End my career? You already tried that when you erased my grades. When you altered the transcripts of every black student in this program. When you silenced anyone who dared to speak up. You think I don't know what this is really about?" Her words landed like stones against stained glass. The fragile illusion of fairness cracked instantly. The boardroom was no longer just a meeting. It was an exposed wound. The chairman slammed his palm against the table, the sound echoing like a gavel. "That's enough." His face was red now, the composure of power slipping. But Aaliyah was not finished. Her hands moved quickly, deliberately. From her bag she pulled out a thick folder, overstuffed, bulging with papers, and slid it across the table so hard it skidded into his lap. "No," she said, her voice steady. "This is enough. Emails, records, proof, every name you tried to bury, every life you ruined to protect your system." The folder landed with a heavy thud. For a long moment, Langston didn't move. His hand hovered over it, but he did not open it. His jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened against the polished surface of the table. The room felt suffocating. Nobody breathed. Nobody dared to speak. Aaliyah leaned forward, her voice quiet now, but razor sharp. "You've spent years treating us like we're disposable, like we don't belong here. You tell us we're liars, cheaters, thieves. You erase our excellence and replace it with failure so you can justify your bias. But today it's your lies on trial." A professor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another rubbed his temples, muttering something inaudible. The students in the back clutched their phones tighter, recording what no one had ever dared to say out loud in this sacred hall of power. Langston finally found his voice, though it cracked slightly, betraying the anger beneath. "Do you think waving around a few papers changes anything? This board decides your fate, not you." But even as he said it, the power was slipping from him. His authority was no longer absolute. Aaliyah's presence, her words, her audacity, they had shifted the ground beneath his feet. For the first time, he looked less like a judge and more like a man cornered by truth. Aaliyah's lips curled into the faintest trace of a smile. "You're wrong. This isn't just about me. It never was. This is about every student you silenced, every voice you erased. And today, everyone watching knows it. The silence that followed was not the silence of intimidation. It was the silence of revelation. Everyone in that room knew the truth, whether they admitted it or not. And in that moment, it was clear. This was not a frightened teenager being scolded by authority. This was a 19-year-old black woman standing at the edge of a battlefield, armed not with weapons but with evidence, defiance, and an unshakable sense of justice. The confrontation had begun, and nothing about this war would be quiet. The folder sat in the center of the boardroom table like a loaded weapon. No one reached for it at first. No one dared. The thick manila edges pressed against the polished surface, stuffed so tightly with papers that the seams threatened to burst. It was more than a folder. It was a reckoning. Edward Langston's hand hovered just above it, fingers twitching as though he might open it. But his hesitation betrayed him. He was a man used to delivering accusations, not facing them. The silence in the room pressed against the walls, heavy and suffocating, as if the truth itself was waiting for someone to breathe. Aaliyah Carter did not look away. She sat perfectly still, her spine straight, her hands folded lightly in her lap. On the surface, she appeared calm, almost serene. But inside, her pulse thundered. The weight of her own history pressed against her ribs, flooding her chest with the heat of memory. Because this moment, the folder, the confrontation, the audacity to speak, had not been born today. It had been building for years, brick by brick, scar by scar. Aaliyah had always been the girl who studied harder than everyone else. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Her earliest memory of injustice came at 12 years old, sitting in her middle school classroom with her hand raised high, waiting patiently as the teacher ignored her. She knew the answer. She always knew the answer. But the teacher's eyes slid past her brown skin and landed on someone else. Someone safer. Someone who looked like the picture in their textbooks. By high school, she had stopped waiting for permission. She wrote essays that dismantled her history lessons, pointing out every omission, every lie told about people who looked like her. She got detention for disrupting class, even though all she had done was tell the truth. Her mother, Aaliyah Carter, never let her forget who she was. Angela worked double shifts at a hospital, her hands swollen from 12 hours of lifting patients and pushing gurneys. But no matter how tired she was, she came home every night with the same words for her daughter. "They will try to make you small. Don't let them. They will try to erase you. Make sure they can't." So Aaliyah carried that with her when she entered this university. She walked onto campus knowing she was an outsider in more ways than one. She was a first-generation college student, a black girl in a program where faces like hers were rare enough to count on one hand. And almost immediately, the battles began. A professor who graded her research harshly but praised a white student for presenting nearly identical findings. A faculty advisor who suggested she lighten the focus of her project because it was too narrow, when what he really meant was too black. Then, the quiet disappearance of her grades from the online system, the sudden accusations of plagiarism without evidence, the whispers in the hallway that she was only admitted because of quotas. Each cut was small, deliberate, designed to bleed her confidence slowly. But instead of draining her, it sharpened her. She began saving everything: emails, drafts, graded papers, comments scribbled in margins, transcripts that mysteriously shifted from A's to C's overnight. She printed them, cataloged them, placed them into binders. She knew what was happening, and she knew one day she would need proof. Now, in this boardroom, that proof sat on the table. A professor finally reached for the folder, his hesitation written in every slow movement of his hand. His name was Dr. Harland, one of the oldest members of the faculty, a man who had spent decades pretending not to see what was in front of him. The weight of the folder seemed to bend his shoulders as he opened it and began to sift through the contents. Murmurs started as he turned the pages. His brows furrowed, his lips tightened. A few papers slid out, fluttering to the floor, where a student in the back quickly snatched one up. The boy's eyes widened as he scanned it, then darted to Aaliyah with something between awe and fear. Langston's jaw tightened. "This is irrelevant," he snapped, his voice cutting through the whispers. But his tone lacked its earlier command. It sounded brittle, defensive. Aaliyah leaned forward, her voice calm but resolute. "Irrelevant? These are your own records, your own words. Every time you accused me, or any student who looks like me, of dishonesty without evidence, it's right there. Every meeting you claimed never happened, every grade altered without cause, every warning email. Irrelevant or inconvenient." The gallery of students stirred. Phones were raised higher now, their red recording lights glowing like fireflies in the dim room. The story was no longer confined to these walls. It was spreading, silently, invisibly, through every lens, every whisper, every social media post waiting to explode. And yet, despite the growing tremor of revelation, Aaliyah's mind slipped briefly inward. She saw her mother's face, lined with exhaustion but glowing with pride, telling her she belonged here even when the world said otherwise. She remembered the nights she stayed awake until sunrise, her eyes burning from the blue light of her laptop, rewriting drafts because she knew her first perfect version would be dismissed as not good enough. She thought of every black student who had sat in the same room before her, silent, accused, erased. This was not just her battle. This was the inheritance of silence she had refused to accept. The tension broke when Dr. Harland cleared his throat. His voice was low, but it carried. "Mr. Chairman, these documents, they appear authentic." The words were small, but they were seismic. Langston's face turned crimson. His composure fractured, the cracks spreading like glass under strain. He opened his mouth, but for the first time, no words came. The silence pressed harder now, not oppressive but damning. And Aaliyah, sitting straighter than ever, knew what they all felt in that moment. The system had been forced to look in the mirror. But mirrors do not just reflect, they expose. And what Aaliyah had just unsealed would not stay contained in this room for long. The boardroom was no longer still. The moment Dr. Harland admitted the documents appeared authentic, the carefully constructed facade of control cracked wide open. What had once been a polished chamber of authority now felt like a battlefield. Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into open voices. The leather chairs that once held solemn figures now leaned forward, restless, uneasy. The students in the back were no longer silent spectators. They were witnesses, recorders, chroniclers of an unfolding storm. At the center of it all, Edward Langston looked less like the immovable chairman of the board and more like a man drowning in his own authority. His face, once smug, was flushed crimson. His jaw clenched tight. His fingers dug into the table's edge as if he could keep power from slipping through his grip by force alone. "This is a distraction," he said finally, his voice louder than before, edged with desperation. "One student's accusations do not outweigh the integrity of this institution. Do not let her theatrics mislead you. This is exactly what I warned you about. Manipulation, deceit, a performance meant to avoid accountability." But even as he spoke, his words felt hollow. His voice carried sound, but no longer command. Aaliyah did not flinch. She rose slowly from her chair, each movement deliberate, as though she were stepping into a role she had always known she would one day play. The weight of dozens of eyes pressed against her, but she welcomed it. For the first time, the silence that followed was not against her. It was with her. She placed both hands on the table and leaned forward, her gaze locked onto Langston. Her voice came steady, unwavering, but infused with fire. "You think this is a performance? That folder isn't theater. It's truth. Truth you thought would stay buried. But you underestimated me. You underestimated all of us. You thought erasure was the same as silence, but silence isn't the same as surrender." Her words rolled across the room like thunder. Professors shifted uncomfortably, their faces betraying years of complicity. Some avoided her gaze entirely, staring at their hands or the table, unwilling to face the reality of what they had allowed. Others looked directly at her, their eyes reflecting something they had long forgotten: shame. Langston slammed his palm against the table again, but this time it no longer carried authority. It sounded desperate. Enough of this. The board will deliberate without interruptions. Guards. He turned toward the door, summoning the security officers who had been standing silently at the edge of the room. The sound of chairs scraping the floor pierced the tension. Students in the back stood suddenly, their phones raised higher, their voices no longer whispers but shouts. "You can't silence her," one called out. "We're recording everything," shouted another. The guards hesitated. They were trained to follow orders, but the air had shifted. The presence of dozens of recording phones made every move they contemplated heavy with consequence. One step toward Aaliyah could ignite a scandal far larger than the boardroom itself. Langston's fury deepened. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "You will regret this. I have ended careers with a single phone call. Do you think you're untouchable because you brought papers? You're a child in a system you can't possibly understand." Aaliyah straightened to her full height, her chin lifting slightly, her voice rising above his. "No, Chairman Langston. I understand the system better than you think. I understand it's built to protect men like you and destroy people like me. I understand you rely on fear to keep us quiet, on shame to keep us small. But I am not afraid of you, and I will not be small for you. Not today. Not ever." The gallery erupted. Students clapped, some shouted, others stomped their feet against the polished floor. It was not chaos, it was a surge of something larger, something undeniable. It was the sound of silence breaking. Dr. Harland, still holding the folder, looked shaken. His voice, when he finally spoke, was fragile but carried the weight of truth. "Chairman, perhaps we should consider the implications of this evidence. It would be irresponsible to dismiss it outright." Langston turned on him sharply, his fury spilling in all directions. "Implications? Do you not see what she is doing? She is undermining the very credibility of this board. If we allow this, if we allow her to walk out of here with her accusations unchallenged, then we lose control." The word slipped before he could catch it. Control. Not truth, not integrity, not justice. Control. And that was all it took. A student's voice rang out from the back, clear and piercing. "So that's what this was about all along. Control." The room erupted again, louder this time. The fragile dam of pretense shattered completely. Professors looked at one another, some shaking their heads, others sinking lower into their chairs. Langston's face drained of color. Aaliyah stepped back slightly, letting the voices of others rise with hers. She did not need to shout. She had already spoken. She had already opened the wound, and now it was bleeding where everyone could see. The security guards finally stepped forward, but not toward her. They moved closer to the crowd of students, forming a hesitant barrier, their expressions uncertain. They knew there was no way to silence this moment without making it worse. Langston pounded the table again, his voice breaking with frustration. "This hearing is adjourned. Everyone out." But the command rang hollow, swallowed by the sound of dozens of voices chanting in unison. "We will not be silent. We will not be silent." Phones streamed live, voices carried across the internet, and within minutes the story would leap from this suffocating boardroom into the outside world. Langston could feel the walls closing in, and Aaliyah Carter, standing at the eye of the storm she had unleashed, knew this was only the beginning. She had not just defended herself. She had forced an institution to face its own corruption. And though the battle ahead would be brutal, the silence had been broken. And once silence is broken, it can never be restored. The following week, the confrontation that had shaken the boardroom returned in a new form, heavier, colder, and far more dangerous. This was no longer a disciplinary meeting hidden behind polished wood and whispered accusations. This was a tribunal, convened under the guise of procedure, but carrying the weight of a trial meant to silence her for good. The room itself told the story. No longer the intimate setting of the boardroom, this chamber was larger, austere, designed to mimic a courtroom. High ceilings arched above them, white walls echoing every sound. A raised platform seated the board members like judges, their long table stretching out as though it were a barrier between them and the accused. Rows of chairs filled the back, occupied by professors, administrators, and students who had insisted on attending despite every effort to keep them away. Aaliyah Carter sat at the lone table in the center of the room, a single chair set apart from everyone else. There was no mistaking what this arrangement was meant to communicate. She was on trial, not for a crime but for daring to speak the truth. Her folder of evidence sat in front of her, thick with papers, but even that seemed fragile against the spectacle arrayed against her. On either side of the platform sat attorneys hired by the university, their suits sharp, their faces expressionless. They spoke in measured tones, flipping through binders that looked prepared long before she had ever spoken. Langston sat at the center of the board's raised dais, his hands folded neatly, his expression carefully reconstructed into something resembling calm authority. He had recovered his composure after the debacle of the previous week. But beneath his polished exterior, there was something new in his eyes, a glint of desperation that betrayed just how much this hearing meant to him. The hearing began with ceremony. A clerk read out charges in a monotone voice: falsifying data, academic dishonesty, violation of the university's honor code. Each charge was read slowly, deliberately, meant to weigh her down before she even spoke. The words reverberated in the chamber like accusations carved into stone. When it was her turn to respond, she rose from her chair. The air felt heavy as dozens of eyes fixed on her. She did not allow herself to tremble. "I stand here accused of dishonesty," she began, her voice clear, steady. "But the real dishonesty lies in the actions of this board, which has erased transcripts, manipulated records, and silenced voices for years. I am not the first student brought here under false pretenses. I am only the first to bring the truth with me." Gasps rippled through the audience, but the attorneys moved quickly to reassert control. One of them, a tall man with steel-rimmed glasses, rose from his chair and spoke with rehearsed precision. "Miss Carter, you claim to have evidence of systemic misconduct, yet what you presented last week is inadmissible hearsay. Stolen emails, manipulated data, unverified claims. You have no authority to interpret or present these documents. This tribunal is not a stage for unfounded accusations." Aaliyah turned toward him, her voice sharpened. "Unfounded? Tell that to the students whose grades were altered, whose scholarships vanished, whose futures were stolen. These are not numbers on a page. These are lives." Her words echoed, heavy with weight, and for a moment the attorney faltered. But Langston interjected before the silence could spread. "This is not about other students," he said firmly, his tone calculated to sound impartial. "This is about you, Miss Carter, and your actions. Do not attempt to deflect responsibility by dragging others into your defense." A murmur of discontent stirred in the gallery, but Langston ignored it. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes locked on hers. "We are not here to debate institutional policy. We are here to decide whether you, a single student, have violated the honor of this university." The words dripped with irony. He spoke of honor while clinging to corruption. He spoke of rules while twisting them to his will. And everyone in that room could feel it. Aaliyah inhaled slowly, grounding herself. She placed her hand on the folder in front of her, then lifted it for all to see. "This is not just about me, and you know it. These are not stories I made up. These are your words, your emails, your directives. You cannot bury them now." She opened the folder, pulling out a single document, holding it high enough for the audience to see. "This," she said, her voice rising, "is an email from your office, Chairman Langston, sent to a professor instructing them to review the grading discrepancy of a student who, by coincidence, was black. The grade was lowered without cause, the scholarship revoked, and the student forced to withdraw. You call this honor?" A ripple of shock surged through the room. Phones in the audience flashed as students snapped pictures. Professors exchanged looks, some of horror, others of complicity. Langston's face twitched, just enough for the mask to slip. Before he could speak, Aaliyah pressed on. And this is not an isolated case. Page after page, name after name, student after student. How many futures have you rewritten? How many lives have you dismissed? How many young people walked into this institution believing in fairness, only to be broken by your lies? Her voice trembled now, not with fear but with fury. You call me dishonest, but you are the architects of dishonesty. You call me unworthy, but you built a system designed to strip worth from people who look like me. The room erupted, louder than before. Students shouted, some standing in defiance, others chanting Aaliyah's name. Professors shifted uneasily, torn between silence and complicity. The tribunal, meant to showcase her downfall, had become a stage for her defiance. Langston slammed the gavel in front of him, his voice breaking as he shouted, "Order! This is an academic proceeding, not a circus." But his voice was drowned out. The chants grew louder, the tension sharper. The tribunal was slipping from his control, and he knew it. Aaliyah lowered the paper slowly, her gaze never leaving his. You tried to silence me once. You will not succeed again. You may end my enrollment. You may tarnish my record. But you cannot erase the truth. And you cannot erase me. The words landed like a final blow. The gavel pounded again, but it no longer mattered. Authority was slipping away, and everyone in that room knew it. For Aaliyah, the tribunal was not an end. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And as she gathered her papers, her hands steady despite the storm around her, she understood one thing with absolute clarity. Silence had been broken in the heart of the institution. The system would fight to survive, but its walls were already crumbling. When the tribunal adjourned that day, it was clear to everyone in the chamber that the school's attempt to silence Aaliyah had collapsed under its own weight. The gavel's echo lingered in the air long after the board members fled the dais, their robes of authority stripped bare by truth. Yet the aftermath did not remain contained within those sterile white walls. It spilled outward like a river breaking a dam, carrying her defiance into corridors, dormitories, and streets. By evening, the story was everywhere. Students who had recorded the proceedings uploaded the footage within minutes. The images of Aaliyah standing tall, her voice unshaken as she held the incriminating emails high, spread with the velocity of wildfire. Screens in dorm rooms, phones in cafeterias, laptops in coffee shops all lit up with her words. In every corner of campus, whispers turned into shouts, and isolation turned into solidarity. By the time Aaliyah stepped outside the tribunal hall, the courtyard was already swelling with a crowd. At first, it was a few dozen students clustered together, chanting her name. Then hundreds, then more. Placards appeared almost instantly, hastily written messages on cardboard and poster board that read, "We believe Aaliyah. Stop the lies. Honor means truth." The chants shook the evening air, rolling across campus until even those who had not seen the video felt compelled to witness what was happening. Aaliyah stood at the steps, her heart pounding, her breath uneven. She had expected to walk into silence, to find herself alone once the board declared her guilty. Instead, she found herself standing in front of a movement, and for the first time since the accusations began, she felt the crushing weight on her chest ease, replaced by something fierce and unstoppable, the knowledge that she was not alone. Yet inside the administrative offices, panic was spreading. Langston convened an emergency meeting with the remaining board members, his composure unraveling. The leaked documents had circulated too quickly, the narrative shifting too violently for him to contain. For years, he had controlled the story, manipulating grades, burying records, punishing students who dared to ask questions. But now, the story was no longer his to tell. The university president issued a carefully worded statement late that night, claiming the school took allegations of misconduct seriously and would review procedures internally. But the words rang hollow. Students recognized the attempt to delay and deflect, and by morning, national media had arrived. Vans with satellite dishes parked outside campus gates. Reporters clustered by the library steps, microphones extended toward anyone willing to speak. And speak they did. Students who had remained silent out of fear finally came forward, some on record, some anonymously, all echoing the same story of erased grades, denied scholarships, and systemic bias. Aaliyah did not seek the spotlight, yet it found her. News anchors replayed the tribunal footage on loop, commentators dissected her every word, and social media crowned her the symbol of resistance against academic injustice. For the first time, the institution that had wielded power over her was being forced to answer to the world. Still, justice was not guaranteed. The board attempted one last maneuver. Behind closed doors, Langston urged colleagues to expel her quietly, to frame her as disruptive, to insist that the integrity of the university depended on removing her. He argued that even if the emails were authentic, the exposure of them violated protocol, that her defiance was itself grounds for dismissal. But cracks had already formed among his allies. Some board members, sensing the shift in public opinion, hesitated. Others, privately shaken by the evidence, refused to follow him further into ruin. The final hearing was scheduled for the end of the week, this time in the largest auditorium on campus. The administration hoped the space would project formality, but it became something else entirely, a stage for justice. Thousands gathered, filling every seat, spilling into hallways, crowding outside where speakers broadcasted the proceedings. When Aaliyah entered the auditorium, the eruption of applause was thunderous, not the polite clapping reserved for ceremonies, but the roar of a people who had chosen their champion. She walked slowly to her table, steadying herself with each step, the folder of evidence clutched against her chest like both weapon and shield. Langston sat at the board's table, his face drawn tight, his arrogance cracked into something bordering on desperation. He no longer looked like the untouchable figure of authority who had stared her down in the mahogany boardroom. He looked like a man fighting not for truth, but for survival. The proceeding began with statements, the board attempting once more to assert its narrative. They spoke of rules, of procedures, of tradition. They insisted that the honor code must be upheld at all costs, and that Aaliyah's actions undermined that code. Their words were polished, rehearsed, but they rang hollow in the cavernous hall. When her turn came, Aaliyah did not begin with accusations or evidence. She began with her story. She spoke of her childhood, of her parents' sacrifices, of the nights she studied until her vision blurred because she believed education was her path forward. She spoke of walking into classrooms where she was the only black student, of the professors who looked through her as though she were invisible, of the moments when she doubted whether she belonged at all. And then she spoke of the day she discovered her grades had been altered, of the despair that followed, of the decision to fight rather than surrender. Her words were not loud, but they were unshakable. They carried the weight of generations who had been told they did not belong, who had been erased in silence. By the time she lifted the folder of documents once more, the audience was already with her, their breaths caught, their hearts tethered to hers. "This is not just about me," she said, her voice steady. "This is about every student whose dreams were stolen because someone decided their skin color made them less deserving. This is about the truth this institution has tried to bury. And if you expel me today, know this, you are not silencing me. You are silencing every voice that dared to believe in justice. But we will not be silenced. Not anymore." The room erupted in thunderous applause, the sound rolling like a wave that refused to end. Even outside, where thousands more listened, the roar carried across campus. Langston pounded his gavel, shouting for order, but the sound was swallowed whole by the voices of those who would no longer be silent. The vote was called. For the first time, the board members did not speak with certainty. Some eyes avoided Langston's glare, others shifted nervously, but one by one, the decision emerged. The motion to expel Aaliyah failed. Instead, a new motion passed, an independent investigation into the board's practices, with Langston himself placed on leave pending review. It was not just vindication. It was justice cracking through the walls of an institution built to exclude. Aaliyah had not only defended herself, she had forced accountability upon those who believed they were untouchable. When she stepped outside after the hearing, the crowd was waiting. They surged toward her, not to smother her but to lift her. Students embraced her. Professors shook her hand. Strangers called her name as though she had become more than a student, more than a symbol. She had become the embodiment of truth spoken against power. In the days that followed, the investigation widened. More students came forward, their stories echoing hers. National networks debated the case. Op-eds praised her courage, and other universities faced pressure to examine their own practices. Aaliyah, who had walked into the boardroom as one young woman against a wall of power, had ignited a movement that stretched far beyond her campus. Yet even as the world watched, she did not see herself as a hero. She was still a student, still carrying the scars of what had been done to her, still aware of how close she had come to being destroyed. But she also knew that justice, once forced into the light, could not easily be hidden again. Her story became a mirror held up to a nation, a reflection of systemic injustice, but also of the possibility of change when one voice refuses to be silenced. And that, perhaps, is where we leave Aaliyah's story. Not with a perfect ending, but with a reckoning that continues beyond her. Because her fight was not just her own. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they do not belong, and to everyone who believes the truth is worth defending, no matter the cost. So as you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what would you do if the system turned against you? Would you remain silent? Or would you rise like Aaliyah and demand to be heard? If the story moved you, if it opened your eyes to the resilience of those who fight for justice, then do not let it stop here. Share it with others. Spark the conversation. And if you want more stories that shine a light on hidden truths and the battles fought in silence, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Like this video to show your support, and leave a comment below, because your voice matters too. Justice is never quiet. It is spoken into the world, one voice at a time.